We're going to start by talking about act consequentialism, or in particular act utilitarianism, as first sort of devised by the philosopher Jeremy Bentham. It's a really, really interesting approach to ethical theorizing and gets a lot of really intuitive results. So let's dive in. So Jeremy Bentham, really interesting guy. Little trigger warning, I guess, if you want to Google him and see what he looks like, because most of the pictures that come up are of his desiccated corpse that has been stuffed and on display at the University College London. Apparently at some point his head fell off and it's just kind of sitting next to him. So it's not the most fun thing to look at, but interesting guy. So utilitarianism. So remember, this is when we take a consequentialist theory and plug in welfarism, or in our case hedonism, as a theory of value. And this is what Bentham did. And so by the principle of utility, he says, is meant that principle which approves or disapproves of every action whatsoever, so thumbs up and thumbs down to every action according to the tendency which it appears to have. So how does it seem like it's going to augment or diminish, improve or decrease the happiness of the party whose interest is in question? So this is how we're going to evaluate the moral status of an action, is the tendency that it seems to have to either improve somebody's happiness or decrease it. The more that it improves it, the better the act is. I mean, that's the basic idea. And Bentham, look at his dates here, 1748, 1832. We're talking, a pretty good while ago. He's got some pretty progressive views, especially for his time. Animals would have been capable of suffering, so, clearly their well-being would be an important thing. We'd want to do what we can to try to ensure their happiness. Women's right to vote, very much anti-slavery, right? That is a stain upon human civilization. Universal education, that's kind of nice. He also was an advocate for prison reform, and that's kind of an interesting thing too. He really just didn't want people to suffer. He wanted people to try to enjoy happiness. And it leads to these kind of naturally, these sort of progressive principles. Now, you don't need to know this. I just wanted to kind of show you how complicated this thing can get, right? Because Bentham wanted to treat this almost like a math problem and think about well, how intense is the pleasure? How likely is it to occur? Is it going to be followed by stuff of the same kind? These are some amazing words, by the way. Propinquity. Love it. And what you end up doing is trying to measure the total amount of happiness in a unit that he called a utile. A unit of happiness. And this is a pretty interesting approach. It takes, these sort of theory-laden ideas and tries to give them genuine practical import. And I love that idea. Now, here's something that's sort of interesting. So what we're going to do, we're going to pick the option that has the most utility, that has the most happiness. So let's suppose that we've got some kind of new policy that we're thinking about enacting, and we've got two options. So option 1 and option 2, right? And these two options, both of them help group A, but harm group B. Now, if you're just doing simple aggregation, if you're just taking the amount of happiness and subtracting the sadness that it produces, or the suffering, and then taking the total, then it's pretty clear here that option 2 is the better option. I just wanted to flag this as an interesting moment, though, because think about it maybe a different way. Notice option 2 benefits group A twice as much, right? 30 is twice of 15. But it harms group B 3 times as much. That is a different way of kind of thinking about, trying to avoid harm. And, maybe a better approach is to pick the outcome that causes the least amount of suffering, the least amount of harm, in which case option 1 would be the better option. So there's different ways of thinking about this, different ways of calculating it. This is just how Bentham would do it. Now, what this ends up doing is creating some pretty interesting issues for ACT consequentialist theories in general and ACT utilitarianism in particular. And we're going to look at 4 main objections to the view, but let's save that for next time. We can look at the objections to the view and then maybe get a little bit at the responses to it. I'll see you then.